Uh, how's that size? Want it bigger?
It's good here.
I'll make it a little bigger.
That's even better then.
I can go bigger, but I'm going to lose my way, but we'll figure it out. All right. Matt, you want me to get started?
Yes, go for it.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. My name is Mike Kanakos, and I'm going to be talking tonight about how to make your first tools module. As I was saying before we started recording, that I consider myself an intermediate scripter, automation person. I have some skill in making modules, but I don't do a ton of modules. So part of the reason for doing talks like this is also to reinforce my skill set and fill in the holes. I always welcome you guys to mention anything that you think I might have gotten wrong, or if you know of a better way. This is meant to be interactive. You guys are welcome to sit back and watch. However, I encourage you to speak up if there's something you don't have a question about. I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff here tonight. And if nobody asks me any questions, I'm assuming that I'm probably the world's best presenter in the world, but that's probably not true. So please feel free to mention anything that you have a question about. I'd be happy to talk about it. When I go full screen for the RDP session into my demo lab, I'm not going to be able to see the Teams thing. So if you're typing in chat, it's not making its way to me until someone tells me about it. So just keep that in mind. So with that being said, the talk tonight is about making your first tools module. And I highlighted 2 words on this first slide for a particular reason. I think that most people's intro into making modules is they write some scripts. They come up with some scripts or some functions that do some interesting stuff, that query stuff probably on their local network or on their local machine. And they realize, hey, I need to try to share this with my teammates or with some friends. And that's sort of your entryway into making a module. So this is about making your first tools module. And the reason that I'm highlighting the word first is because I'm a big advocate of doing automation. And there's some great tools out there to help automate module building, like Plaster or Module Builder. These are toolkits that are available online that are fantastic for automating a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight. However, if it's your first module that you're building, you really shouldn't be jumping straight to automation. You really should know how these things work. So we're going to do it by hand. We're going to do it the old school way. We're going to build it all ourselves. And I think when you get done tonight, you're going to see that it's really not that challenging to make a module. So with that being said, let's jump in and talk about what start talking about this. All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about what is a module. We'll jump into creating the first module, and then we'll talk a little bit about sharing a module. I'm going to do some slides for the module basics because there really is just a few things to go over, and slides just do a great job of showing that off. We got about 10 slides. We should be through that in maybe 8-10 minutes. And then the rest of the night is going to be demos. And we're going to spend the lion's share of the work in creating our first module. Sharing, we'll touch upon that a little bit at the end, but they sort of go together. So by the time we get to the sharing part, we'll have done quite a bit of sharing already. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So some information about myself. I'm an AD engineer by day. I'm officially an infrastructure tools engineer. Most of you probably know me from the community. I'm fairly active in the community. If you'd like to reach out to me, please do so. I would be happy to chat with you. Tonight's talk definitely needs some references and thank yous. My talk borrows heavily from Kevin Marquette's website, PowerShell Explained. He has a fantastic guide for how to build modules. I followed that very heavily. I find Kevin's site excellent as a resource. I invite you to reach out to him and go to his website when you aren't stuck. He's fantastic. Also, Microsoft Docs. I use them heavily for this talk to learn concepts and figure out how to do things. And last but not least, my good buddy Stevie Coaster. He bailed me out with some code corrections about an hour and a half ago. And as always, he's a good friend of mine. He always supports me, always helps me out when I'm in a pinch. So I just want to take a moment to say thanks for helping me out all along. So with that being said, let's go back to school for a second. Who remembers when they went to school and they finally got to that age where you were allowed to take a calculator to school? And when you started being able to use a calculator at school to do the math, you probably got really frustrated and said something along the lines of, why did I have to waste all my time having to do the math by hand when I could have used a calculator? This is so much easier. And that is true. You get to a certain point where things become easier because we've learned, and it's assumed that you have a basic level of knowledge. And then you move on to more challenging things. And because you're doing more challenging things, we try to speed up the steps that are simple. So before you can use a calculator, you need to know how to do the math, right? And that's going to be the same kind of premise that we're using here with a module. Before you can jump to the automation tools to build those modules for you better, quicker, faster, you need to know how to do the modules by hand. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. As I said earlier, I'm a big fan of automation, and I think you should really look into automation for these tools. But before you get to automation, you really need to know how it works. So let's go through that, and let's talk about level setting right from the beginning. What is a module? Okay, so a module is very simple. It's a portable package for circulating code, right? Portable package contains PowerShell commands, and it consists of 6 different things that could be in a module. I've highlighted the word functions because that's where we're going to spend our time tonight. You can make obviously commandlets, you can have providers, you can have all kinds of other things in there, but we're going to deal with functions because that's really the core of modules, and it's where most people get started, and it's very relatable. So if we think about why should we even bother to make a module? And it's very simple. Modules are about portability. If you want to share your code with others, whether it's other people or other computers, a module is a fantastic way to make that happen. If you think about when you need to get code from vendors, they usually have a module, usually download that module, and with a few commands, you have it installed, and you almost never have to think about where that module is. The work that the module does installs and sets up your environment for you. And because of that, it's a fantastic tool to take your code and circulate it, whether it be with your team members, friends, associates, or maybe put it out on the internet in some place like the PowerShell gallery and let people consume your code without you having to walk through and show people how to get their environment set up. So there's a couple of major pieces to a module that we need to think about. And I really want to make sure that everybody understands these things because there's not a lot to a module when we talk about the basics. You can get very, very detailed with a module at the end of the day, but to start, there's really just 4 pieces, right? You have the code that you want to circulate, and those consist of PS1 files. You have supporting files, which can be helper scripts, other modules, things like that. And then you have something called a manifest, and we wrap it all together in a directory. And a manifest is nothing scary. It's just metadata. And if you're not sure what that is, that's simply data about data. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a second here. So to dive in a little bit farther on the major pieces, so we talked about the code, right? The code is the core of a module. The code is going to be contained in a PSM1 file, right? So I like to think of the M in PSM for module, and I like to think of the D in PSD as data. So the PSD file is going to be that contains the data about your module. You can also have public and private scripts and folders. And of course, you should have good documentation. And those are the 4 pieces really that make up a module at the basic level. There is more that you can do when you get up to the more advanced levels. But to get started, we have 4 things that we're covering. And I actually want to stop here for a second and make sure that people are on board and they understand that we have a PSM1 that contains the code and a PSD that contains the data about the module. Because when we get into the demos, it's going to be PSM1 and PSD1s all throughout the demos, and I want to make sure no one's lost. So I'll just pause for a second. I can still see the chat. Is anybody unclear about the use of a PSM1 or a PSD1? All right, great. We're going to go into them in more detail. So if you don't understand them completely right now, that's perfectly okay. But just understand that there's two major pieces, PSM1 and a PSD, and they belong in a folder. We're going to go into that a little bit more now. So if we dive into what is a PSM1, it's, as I said, it's the code. And the PSM1 is where the actual code lives in your module when we're talking about the basics. There are other ways to organize it when you get into more advanced things. But to start off, if you want to find out where the code lives in a module, most likely you're going to open up the PSM1 file, and you're going to at least get clues to where it's located in the file or see the actual code itself. Interestingly enough, any PowerShell file can be turned into a PSM1 just by simply renaming it from PS1 to PSM1. So just doing that, you've sort of unofficially created your first module. So you go out and you take that get networkinfo.ps1 script that you built, that you love. It's a function, it's got help in it, and you want to turn it into a module or it's the start of a module. You just rename the extension and you're off to the races. So there are some requirements, and a PSM1 needs to be saved in a folder of the same name. So we're going to highlight this more in a little bit, but if we wanted to call a module Mike's Super Awesome Module, we would have a PSM1 that says Mike's Super Awesome Module .psm1, and that would live in a folder called Mike's Super Awesome Module. And that's really all there is to it. So along with that, your module needs to belong in one of the PS module paths, in one of the paths that is saved in the PS module path, which we're going to talk about later, and there's a reason for that. But actually, it doesn't actually need to be there. You can import them manually, and we're going to spend some time doing that. So talking about the PSD1 for a second here, I mentioned that that's a manifest, and that's the data about the module, right? So if I want to know, if I make a module and I have a certain amount of code that goes into a module, that's great. But what if I want to know about the module itself? The PSD1 is where that information comes from, and it's going to describe the contents and the attributes of a module. So it's going to contain stuff like the module name, the version, the author, and GUID, along with a lot of other information that you can choose to include. But understand that a module can be simply a PSM1 by itself. And if you want to describe the file, you add that PSD1 on top. Inside of PSD1, you can also put prerequisites. So let's say you build this awesome module, but this awesome module needs Active Directory to run. It needs the Active Directory modules. Well, you can say this module requires the Active Directory module, so that when someone tries to load this module, it'll say, hey, this ain't going to work because you need a required piece. So you can put prerequisites about other pieces that need to be along the way for your module to work correctly. And as I started to allude to just a few minutes ago, a PSD1 is not a required file of a module, but any real module that has any usefulness is going to contain a PSD1. But I'm going to show you here in just a few seconds that we can get started making a module very simply without having to get to that PSD1. So there we go. We're done with slides. I hope that wasn't too painful. We're going to jump into demos here. So let me just show you what we got going on here a little bit. So give me 2 seconds here to level set and get myself set up. So I have a little bit of a script here that I want to walk through that should show you guys everything that I'm looking to highlight tonight. So I've done this stuff here. So very quickly, I want to show you guys what we're going to be working with tonight. All right, so we're working on a tools module. So I've picked 3 functions to include in my tools module that I'm going to build. These are functions. I'll show you how they work in a little bit. I'm hoping by the name of the files that you guys can understand what they do, but a quick run through. Get PC uptime is going to tell me the time the computer's been online and the last boot time. Get PC info is going to give me a host of information about the computer I'm querying, and get drive info is going to give me info about the drives. And one thing that I want to highlight that we're going to come back to a little later on is that the get PC info script calls the get drive info script. And that was done by design by me when I built these scripts. I built these scripts prior to making modules. I started off with a PC info script that did many things. And best practices are that functions are supposed to have one thing that they do. So I'm starting to break off pieces of the PC info script into separate utilities that I can call. And that gives me the ability to say, hey, maybe I just want to know the drive info on a machine, or maybe I want to know more info. But understand that the drive info script is called by PC info. We're going to look at that later. All right. Does everybody understand these three files here? Because these are going to be the core of our module. If anybody has any questions about that, I would be happy to answer them. Please ignore these super long paths right now. I'll try to abstract those away from you guys as much as possible. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is all my modules in this demo are going to be called, whoops. Let me bring that back up for a second. All the modules over here, I just want to show you, we're gonna work with 3 modules tonight. And I've given them very ridiculous names so that we can understand the difference between them. So we're going to start with a module called demo module simple. And then we're going to move on and show a demo module with a manifest. And then eventually we'll work up to a module that has a public and a private folder. Okay, so these are the 3 folders that we're going to be working with. These are the 3 modules that I will be working on tonight. Now, the reason I ran this command here is to show you that they're not installed already, right? So we're going to do it as we go. I've pre-built this stuff. I understand how it should work, but I want you to see how we build up the pieces and make our functions turn into modules and learn how to share them. So understand that right now we're working with a clean environment. This functions folder here is simply for me to be able to point this out to you guys. It has no value in the meeting tonight other than for me to just put some functions outside of the scripts, outside of the modules area. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into our first demo module here. Okay, we're going to look at the demo module simple module that I built. And what I want to show here is what the PSM file looks like. So if you remember, I had said that a module consists of a PSM and possibly a PSD. So the reason this is called a simple module is because this module has one file, a PSM. And all I've done in that file is I've simply taken those 3 functions that you saw earlier, 1, 2, 3, and I've copied and pasted them straight into the PSM1 file and just hit save. Okay. Now, a couple of rules that we have to cover. The PSM1 file needs to match the folder name. So you see I've done that here. But you can see here, if you expand these out, I know I didn't show you the code before, but these are my functions. And one good thing that I've learned over the years is that as you build functions and you start to have some loops that come into these functions and areas that work, I have gotten into the habit of putting end statements so that when I want to trace out my brackets, it's a lot easier. And that translates up really well when you start to make functions and you put things like end function here, because when you can have a PSM1 that could have 10, 15, 20 functions in it, if you wanted to, I'm at 400 lines of code here for just 3 functions because there's help files included. If I had 10 or 15 functions in here, I might be at 15 or 1900 lines of code, and it gets pretty hard to figure out where one starts and one ends. So sometimes putting in little markers like this is a nice little tip when you're figuring out what you're trying to do. But back to our module talk here for a second. All I've simply done is taken these 3 functions, paste them into this file, save the file as the module name that I want to call it with the PSM1 extension. And that's all we've done. We've just created our first module. It's that simple. And I could show you how that works. It's really easy here. So let me just get my function, my bearings here. So I've taken my files, I've put them into a PSM1, and now what I'd like to do is I'd like to use that module. So to do that, it's really simple. It's one command. So we're not talking about sharing code yet. We're talking about simply how do I import a module that I just built for myself, my own use. So this is just a path. This is a variable to save me typing a whole bunch of lines of code for paths. So this is just saying, look in the folder here, this SoCal PSUG demo. You see there's a long path there, and then load this file. So if I go here and I load this, and if you remember just 5 minutes ago, I said get module. I said all the modules start with demo. I said get module demo start, and we saw there was no modules installed. So here we go. If we're going to run this now, and we run this, that's now loaded. And now if I come along here, I'm going to go through this as I intended, because I will probably get myself lost here. So now if I go back and I run that same command that I did before, you'll see here, now we have one module that's loaded. So you see, getting started with your first module is very simple. You can simply rename a PS1 file as a PSM1, and then you can do an import module statement, and there you go, you're done. If you want to couple together a bunch of functions into one PSM, it's still the same idea. We just do an import module. And now that we've imported the module, and because we built functions, the nice thing about functions are they're going to run in memory. They're not location dependent. So now that this is in memory, I don't have to worry about what folder I'm in to run my scripts. So a little information here, you can see it pulled in the name of my file, of my module, and it also figured out what commands are in my module. Now, this is a lot easier to have someone do than to do a sneaker net and try to give someone 3, 4, 10 functions, try to get them to load them, teaching them the dot source them. So this is why I said it's great for portability. So we didn't even talk about putting anything out on the PowerShell gallery, internal NuGet repositories, on a file share. This is simply, I import module and I browse to my PSM1, and here I go, I have a file. So now if I want to see the commands that are in there, it's just git command and the name of the module, and you can see it recognizes I have 3 functions. It was pretty obvious here, but if this was a long list, you wouldn't see them all. So here we see we have 3 functions that are available to us. However, we have no version information, and that is actually expected because we don't have a PSD. That version information is going to come from that PSD file. Remember, that's data about the module. So we have no data that describes this module. We only have the files. So we don't know about any version info that was included with these, but that's okay. This works just fine. All right. And if I go here, I can look and I can see a little bit more info about this. I'll just do it here. And you can see we have some more info that's available to us. But again, we don't have a PSD yet, so we don't really have too much useful information that's coming to us. But you can see the bones of a module were built for us with just a little bit of work. And I would hasten to say that probably everybody on this phone call could handle where we're at right now. I'll take a quick pause here. I'm going to grab something to drink. Does anybody have any questions about our simple module that we just installed?
There is a question in chat from Stephen Judd about why do the names of the folder and the module have to be the same?
We don't have a PSD. We don't have a PSD. We have no data about the module. The module name and the module folder have to be the same because that's where it's going to pick up the name of the module. And then later on, when we build other ones, it's going to copy that whole folder information, that whole folder that contains all our files that are in there to a local repository on the machine. And the PSD is going to have pieces in there that are going to reference other files in the folder. So we've coupled everything together in a folder. We've made it easy for the module to find the files that make up the module. Do I have that right, Stephen? I know you are leading me on that one because I know you know the answer. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, it will also, when it's in your $env : PS module path, if the folder and the module name are the same, then it will do feature for auto load of the module, which we're all very used to, but we may not know why it does that.
So you're right, and I didn't highlight that because we're going to pick that up when I get to the third module. I wasn't sure where you were going with that, but thank you for jumping in. That is true. So when a properly built module is put in the right folders, you can get away from doing these import module statements, and you'll be able to auto load the modules. We're going to try to show that off in just a little bit. All right, so we've built our first module. I didn't see any other questions, so I'm just going to keep on going here. So we've built our first module, right? And we got some information about it. Let me go here full screen, right? So we built our first module called demo module simple, right? We don't have any version information, but we have three functions that we can run now, right? So let's see what we're going to do next. All right, I can run a function just to show you how it works. I'll just do the PC uptime one real quick. This is a function I built that's just very simple. It just shows you the uptime and the last boot time. Okay, so we have a working function. And these scripts were not installed prior, so we know that they're working because they're new, they're net new. So our function did install these scripts for us, and we're able to use them immediately. All right, so we're going to now move on, and we're going to try to take it up a step. So I talked about a PSM, a module has a PSM and a PSD. So let's look at what's involved with creating that PSD. So first off, let me show you what it looks like. So here is the next module we're going to look at. And you can see here our manual, our PSM1 file is exactly as it was before. I've just renamed it because we're going to install a new module. We're going to install the same functions, but through a new module. That looks wrong. Okay, so let's go through this a second here. All right, before we get into the details here, this is what a PSD looks like. And I think I renamed this here along the way wrong, so I can fix that. We're going to build a new one anyway. Doesn't really matter. Please sort of ignore that. I think that's a typo on my mistake here. Yeah, so this is what a manifest looks like. And at first glance, it could be a little intimidating. There's a lot of lines in here. Now, I didn't type this. There's a command to build this manifest file, right? And there's a lot of information here that you can customize. At the end of the day, if you pick up anything, understand that the first thing is this is a hash table, right? So we have keys and values, okay? Now I'm going to show you how I built this in a second, but out of all these things here, you're going to see most of the lines are commented out, okay? What I did here is I populated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, and I didn't even build all those lines. That was done for me through a tool called a new module manifest, and that's where we're going to be going next. But I wanted to give you an idea what a PSD looks like. The idea here is that this is where all the information about your module is contained. So author, GUID, company name, PowerShell versions that are required, .NET framework, all kinds of stuff. I've mentioned required modules, lots of things that you could populate in this file to help build a structure for that module that you're trying to create. So let's take a look at this for a second here. What happened here? All right, let's go back here for a second. Run the functions, demo. Okay, I wanted to point out I put a module version in here. Okay, so I put a module version of 001. So numbering of modules is very ambiguous. You can start it any way you want. Some people start at 001. Some people start at 100. A lot of people seem to think that 100 is production level code. And when you're building out your module, you should be in the zeros until you get past the alphas and the betas. There's no rhyme or reason. You can do whatever you like. I just happen to call this 001 for the point of reference, and we should be able to see that later on. All right, so I mentioned that the table, the manifest is a hash table, but we can also create a hash table for ourselves to help populate some information. Here is some information that I put in that I'm going to use to create a new manifest file. Okay, so what we have here is there's a couple of required files, a couple of required parameters. We need to put in a path, a root module, and I believe author. I put module version in because I wanted to add it. It's not a requirement, but really these three are the basics you need to start with. So what we can do here is, and I'm just, is there a question there? I'm just using this splatting here to make it easier to type the variables that I'm going to use to load to create my manifest in a second here. So we've populated a hash table with some basic values. All right. Let me load that. Okay, so now we have so you can see now we have a hash table with 4 values, 4 keys and 4 values. All right. All right, so now we need to get rid of this current file here and PSD. Yeah, so I screwed this up. So let's just do this manually. All right. So I'm getting rid of this because I want to build one right now with you guys. So I built one ahead of time to show you what it looks like, but I also want to show you what it looks like to actually build one. So all I'm doing is I'm calling one command, new module manifest, and it's going to read that little hash table that we created, this information down here, and it's going to populate these fields for me. And not only is it going to populate these fields for me, it's going to build the scaffolding out for all the other fields that I could possibly want. So now if I do this, if we just take a look over here, if everything's working right, we should get a new file here. And there we go. So now we have, oh, I'm in the wrong directory. Let's try that again. Why didn't I switch directories? Oh, I did it twice. Look at that. Let's try this again. All right, so let's take a look over here. Let's close down that simple file. Let's get rid of that function. So now you see I have a new PSD1 file that was created, right? If I knew how to type and I put the change directory command in the right way, it would have been one line of typing. So what I did is I said I went to the directory I was in and I just ran new module manifest and I called the hash table that I created earlier and it created this file. And if we take a look at this file, it's going to basically be the same file we just saw before, right? So here we go. Some basic information. Here's when it was generated. And now here you see we have a different module version, right? Again, arbitrary. I just picked that number tonight. It generated a GUID for me. A GUID is required because if we want to share this module in a public forum, we need to be able to uniquely identify our modules. So it went out and built a random number for us. And you see here, it populated the fields that I had put in, author, module version, root module, and then it put in copyright information for me. I didn't ask for that. And you see the rest of it is basically blank. All right. There is this command, let's say export variables to export. We're going to get to that in a second. That has to deal with a little bit with what Stephen was referring to earlier So when we get to our public and private, we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, so now that we've done that, we've created this module with the manifest. Let's go ahead and see if we can run that module, right? So here we are. I'm simply doing the same exact thing before, but now that we have a PSD file, we don't need to call the PSM1 file anymore. Before, we only had one file. We only had a PSM1, so we were importing that file. And if you remember, we had no version information. Well, now we're going to do it the other way around. We're going to import the PSD file, because the PSD file, if you remember when we looked at our hash table and those fields, it contains the values how to find the other files in the module. So we're going to call that file, and PowerShell is going to do the work for us. So here we go. We're going to run this guy. Okay, so now we've loaded that. Let's see if it worked. All right, so now if you remember before, okay, so now look, here we are. Now we have a module that's loaded, and all I did was say get module and the name of the module. And it shows me the name of the module, which came from the folder. And here's that script, the version information that we had before, right? And now if I do this and I take a look at some more information, you'll see not a whole lot more, but a little bit more, right? So name, path, now we have a version number. We have our same 3 functions, and we can still get those functions. Now, I'm not going to run functions at this point because I've loaded the same functions twice from 2 different modules, and I can't tell you which module it's going to come from. So that's not the point of what we're doing tonight. I want to show you the modules. The functions are less important at this point, but we're going to run them in a little bit. All right, so I can show you. So I want to see all the modules that are installed on my machine. Now, if I was just to do get module, it's gonna scroll with a whole bunch of stuff. We don't want to do that. So we're going to filter this down just a bit here and say, show me just the modules. So now you can see I have both modules installed. Now they both have the same functions. So that's really not too useful, but you can see how we built up. So we built our first module with just one file called demo module simple. We have no version info. Now we started to put a manifest in. We now have some version info. And when we looked at the details of the module, we started to see author and GUID and other important information. But, you know, I had mentioned earlier that this get drive info, this is called from get PC info. Okay. Now, I don't have a problem with that. That's fine with me. If I go and I look at this function here for a second, and I minimize this, I'm going to go down here for a second, just show you this function. So if you're not familiar with the function, I've started with my help files, my parameters, my examples, right? I come down here, I'm eventually going to get to the code, right? Now right here, this drive info line, you'll see this function is calling that other function. And there's a reason I'm pointing this out now, because we're going to move on to our next module, which is going to start to introduce the idea of public and private functions. And we're going to try to hide this. And why would we do that? Well, maybe you have a preference. You want to keep a module simple for your users. Maybe you just want them to be exposed to 2 or 3 commands that they can run. But those 2 or 3 commands behind the scenes may do a multitude of things and may require extra code to do that. But maybe if you're building a module for something like a help desk member and you just don't want them to be running those scripts because they can get themselves into trouble, you can hide those helper functions so that they don't know they're there. But when they run the native commands, the parent commands, let's call them, and it reaches out and it needs those helper commands, it loads them in the background and it does what it has to do. So the point I'm trying to bring out here is that eventually, what happened? Eventually, we're going to get another module listed here. And we should see some different functions that show up this time. So let me jump back into my demo. And I've just completed my second demo, my second module, this time with a manifest. Before we move on, how are we doing with the content? Is everybody on the same page? Do we have questions? Take a quick look over here at the chat. Good, everybody's on the same page, or I've put you all to sleep already. Either way, I can move on. All right, so now we're going to work on this third module here. And this third module is called Demo Module Public Private. And the module is built to highlight the idea that we can have functions that are exposed and functions that are hidden. So first I want to show you the structure. Okay, so now we've started to introduce some structure inside our module. So again, we have a PSM1 and a PSD1, but now we have these two folders, public and private. And what I've gone ahead and done is in the public folder, I've put two functions. And in the private folder, as you might imagine, I put the drive info function. So if things work the way I would like them to, this function should be hidden from our users. And so I want to point out here that the PSD file starts to look different now. And I want to tell you that if you're getting started with functions, this may be a good place for you to stop and practice and get good at this, because I just spent 20 or 30 minutes telling you how it's simple as to use a PSM1 or a PSD1 along with a PSM1, and it's not a lot of work to do. But now when we start to get into this idea of private and public functions, well, now we have to start doing some different things in our PSD file. And that's why I said, if you're new to functions completely, you may want to make a marker in your head and say, I got it up to here. Maybe I don't want to go down the public-private path just yet. But if you're a game, let me show you what it looks like. So here's a PSD1. Okay, so now we have some more information that I put in here. I put a description in. Okay, most of this other stuff is the same. It generated a new GUID, right? I put a different module number in here. We have this root module, which we put in before, but now this concept of a root module becomes very important because it needs to be able to find this file in the module itself. So this is a key aspect when we get to public and private functions. This is going to tell the PSD what file to look for in the root to find it, right? Again, just a hash table. All right, and now I think if we scroll down here, we're going to expose something called functions to export. Now this is built into the manifest. I just simply populated it. And what this is saying here, this is a concept. We've loaded a bunch of functions into our module, and we've created a public and a private folder. But honestly, those public and private folders, they are a standard, but they're really for organization. The part that makes something public or private is what functions get exported when the module is loaded. So what we're saying here is, hey, load the module and just take these two functions and make them available to the end user. So you'll notice that third function that I built is not listed here, okay? If we had different commandlets, we can do the same thing here. We could expose only certain commandlets, certain variables, certain aliases. I did not go down that route. I think is more than I'm trying to cover for tonight. So that's why I said we're focusing just on the functions here. So if this loads and it works correctly, we should now only have two functions available to us. However, we know that this function here requires that third function. So in order for it to run correctly, it needs to be able to reference that function, even though I, as the end user, don't have access to it. Or let me rephrase that and say, I don't see it. All right, let me get my bearings here. Make sure I'm covering all the important things that I wanted to tell you guys about. All right, so I did this the exact same way. All right, I make a manifest, and I put the same exact information in here. So building my manifest is not any different. I don't want to build a new one, so I'm not going to run this code because the one I have is functioning. So I built a little hash table for the important fields that are going to go into my manifest, and I just simply ran new module manifest, and I called that hash table. All right, so now let's import that file. And soon we're going to get to the point that Stephen Judd mentioned about a half hour ago, which is we shouldn't have to import these files. But for our demonstration here, we're still going to import these files manually. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing that I've done before. I'm going to go to the path and I'm going to load the PSD1 file. And the PSD1 file is going to read that information. It's going to see that folder structure. It's going to see that there's 2 files to be exported, and it should import all that information correctly. So let's give it a try and see what happens. All right, so now we've done that. It's loaded. It's very uneventful. Let me just get my bearings here. All right, so before I do more, I'm going to uninstall the other modules. But before I uninstall the other modules, let me just give you a peek at what we have. I want to just see demo modules. So, okay, so here you see we have 3 modules loaded, and you see I have a different version number. I picked that up, and you see I only have 2 functions that are exposed to the end user. So as far as the end user knows, this module consists of 2 functions that they can run. Okay, our drive info function is still there. It's just hidden from the user. If you are diligent enough, you can pick through and you can figure out those files. We're not here trying to block people from running stuff from a security perspective. This is more of a simplicity aspect. Now, the reason I want to uninstall my other modules is because I have these functions loaded multiple times, and I want to run these functions and show you what happens, but I can't guarantee which module is going to load them now, so we need to get rid of them. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm just going to do this manually. I'm going to say remove module. So I didn't really talk about this, but you can remove a module just as simply as you brought a module in. Demo module simple. You know what, let me run a force just to play safe. There was no module there. Okay, great. And then with manifest. Okay, so now if I go back here and I run get module, so now you can see I just have 1 function. So hopefully if I type get drive info, all right, perfect. It's not available to me. And this is why I wanted to delete those modules, because if I would have typed this now, it would have been available to me from one of the first 2 modules that I made. But since we're trying to show that it's hidden, I needed to take those old modules out in order to make that work as expected. But what we want to see here is, does that function that I called work as expected? Okay, so you see here, I ran a function, pulled up all this information, and there's a bunch of drive information here, right? And I'm going to show you how we can variable drive. Let's call it okay, and there's my drive info. Okay. So if you're not familiar with what I did there, is I ran the function and I sent the output of the function to a variable called test. When you use this out variable command, you don't need to specify the $. You've called it a variable in the parameter, so it knows to make a variable. So what that did is it took this information here previously and it saved it to this test variable. And I wanted to access this sub section of my function. So I wanted to call, what I did is I said test.driveinfo, because in this function here, it's not very readable, right? So by calling it out here, it allows it to format it properly. And then I just redid this here. So you can see here I have a C and a D drive. And let's do this. And we'll say sort name format table. All right, so we have a C drive, we have a D drive, and we have a CD-ROM, and this function is built that when it sees a CD-ROM, it skips trying to query the information because there is none. So the point here is that we do have a hidden function called drive info, and it is still working because the PC info function is calling that file. but the user can't run get drive info. It doesn't load. I'm hitting tab, but nothing is coming up. If I was to do the same thing with PC uptime, you see it loads for me. And if I do the same thing with get PC info, right, this is going to run again. Unfortunately, I hit enter. But so my point that I'm trying to make here is that we've built 3 different kinds of modules with just a simple 1 or 2 files. Yes, we could go very much more in depth on more advanced modules, but this is the basics. So we've gone through how to build a module that is just a simple module that's just a PSM1, which just contains a couple of functions. Then we started to introduce some information about the module itself. And then last but not least, we went and we created some functions that we didn't want to expose to the users. So I know that I'm missing some stuff here. So let me just peek at my demo scripts here and make sure that I've covered all the things I want to mention to you. We imported the module. Okay, so if we go back to the beginning, Stephen highlighted something that said the name of the module is important because if we set it up correctly, it will auto load the module for us. And he brings up an important part, which is who the hell wants to do all this importing all the time? Who wants to have to call out to the specific file? So there is a way that you can take your functions and your modules, and you can put them in a particular location. And if your module is built correctly and it's in the right location, PowerShell will do the work for you and auto load it. So we have to go back to those slides that I mentioned, and I mentioned the variable PS module path. So let me make sure we are there. I'm a little ahead of myself here, so all right. So I'm going to get rid of this module for a second. I'm going to take it out completely. All right. So to do that, it's just remove module. I can start typing and it'll autofill the name. Okay, so what that has done is cleaned up our list. So we've got nothing loaded now. So that also means that I can't run get PC info. I am tabbing, there's no tab complete. So that means the function is gone. It's not loaded in memory. So I'm effectively back to where I started. Okay, what we want to highlight now is another way that we can load our modules where we don't have to do the work. And that to do that, we need to understand this PS module path. So I mentioned in the slides that there's a variable called PS module path. I'm going to show that to you now. And what this is here, well, you know what, let me do this. Let me run that again. Okay, what I've done is I said, hey, give me that variable and split. This is normally a list that is continuous that's separated by semicolons. So I've split it out so we can read it here. And what we have here, these are the places on my machine where I can park a module. Now they have different functions. We'll go into them very quickly, but you can see here that there's one here that's specifically for me. So anything that I park here is going to be for Mike only. All right. These other areas are more system specific. And you'll see here there's one for PowerShell 7 and PowerShell. This is where you would put modules if you want to make them available to everybody on the machine. Windows PowerShell is for version for Windows. So now that we're in this new world with PowerShell 7 and cross-plat, we have modules that are cross-platform and we have modules that are Windows specific. So this is a Windows specific location. And then last but not least, here's this old school location. And you would think version 1.0, what do I care about that? That is where all the modules, I believe that Microsoft releases go there. That's the default directory. Let's take a look at that. And you'll see here, those all the big stuff, right? Bits, App Locker, all this good stuff. DHCP services, stuff that I use. These are all the Microsoft blessed modules go in that location. So each location has a function that it serves. It's just up to us to make sure that we put it in the right place. And I'm going to foreshadow by saying we're going to put it here. Okay, so we need to do a little housekeeping here. And while I'm doing a little housekeeping, I'll take a break. see if anybody's got something they want to ask for. I see Steven Valdinger. Stevie, thank you for putting in some stuff. Can you show the PSM1 for the demo module public-private? I'm sorry if I didn't show that. Let me go back to that. Someone should have kicked me and got me to go back to that. Okay, so there's some garbage here. I was trying to get this right. This isn't supposed to be here. Oops, you didn't see that. This is what our PSM1 looks like. And the way this is different now is before we had a PSM1 that had the actual code in it. But now because we have a public and a private folder and we staged our functions in there, what we basically have to do is reference those files. So what we're doing here is we're going out and we're reading those directories, the public and the private, and we're saying we need the full name of those files. So we need the full path, right? And it's loading those, so it knows where they are so that when I want to run them. So this is what's different. And this is why I apologize for skipping this. This is why I had said, if you are not 100% comfortable with building modules, maybe you want to stick with one of the first two and get your feet wet, because this starts to be a challenge when you start making folders and calling those. This is where I got hung up on my module build earlier today. I had some incorrect code in here. Stevie was nice enough to bail me out on this one today. Does that answer the question that was in there from Stephen Judd asked that? I know what it was, but so Joshua, I just want to ask, am I losing you? Am I going too fast? All right. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible without going too deep. All right, so now what I wanted to show next, if we come away from this PSM file for a second, is how can we put that module in a location and have PowerShell do the work for us? So the way we're going to do that now, I don't want to start changing stuff, so let's put that away. Let's put this away, and let's go back here. All right, so what I need to do is I need to copy this module folder here that I've created, because remember, this is sitting in a Git repo somewhere, right? This is my work repo here, right? So we're looking at where I'm developing stuff. People aren't going to have access to this. This is local on my machine. I need to put it in a more public place on the machine. And there's a spot that it goes. We just looked at those paths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this folder now, demo module public private, and I'm going to copy that entire folder to the location that we showed before. And that location was this location: users, username, documents, PowerShell, modules. So what we're going to do now is we're going to copy this here. I'm sorry, guys, I'm getting myself a little lost. Imports. We did that. We did that. We did that. We did that. Okay, so let's copy this. So I'm simply saying copy from my folder structure here to this location. And I'm saying copy all the subfolders. Okay, so I'm going to run this. All right, so now you know what? I should have done this. Let's do this. I'm going to delete this for a second just to show you guys here. So this is what's there now. I have two modules loaded on my personal machine, Import Excel and Platypus. So I'm going to come back to this in a second. Let's do that copy again to show you what happened. We're doing F8. And now you can see I've copied this folder here. And if I go into this folder, it's that folder that we saw over here, just in a regular Explorer view. So in my private folder, I have my functions. In my public, I have my functions and my my PSD and my PSM1. Now, here's the cool thing. When you build this module correctly, you have all the pieces and you have the file names correct and the folder names correct, PowerShell will find it for you. So now I can go here and I'm going to just switch directories for a second. Demo root, just so we're not stepping on each other here. My goal that I'm trying to accomplish here is to make it easy for someone to install my module, right? So we haven't shared it out anywhere on the public yet, but if I could get that folder into the right location, it should load itself. So let's take a look at that. So before, oh, I didn't show, all right, let's do this one more time. I wanted to highlight something that was kind of important to you guys. All right, so let's go back here. I want to see what's available for me to load. Now, if I run this command like this, it's going to scroll off the screen because there's lots of stuff available. It's going to go. Okay, we don't want that. What we want to see is filter it down. I want to see what's available from the modules that I know what they're called. So we're going to filter down to demo. So first, let me clear the screen here. So we got a nice view, and we're going to go in F8, and that's not going to work. Okay, when I do that, there's nothing available for me to load yet because I haven't copied the file into that location. I just went ahead and deleted it. Okay, so nothing is auto imported yet. So now let's go back and do what I just did before, and I copy that folder over there. Sorry, I went a little out of order, guys, and I'm sorry if I confused anybody. We're going to copy that folder up again. Okay, so now if we go back here, and now we have this folder located in that directory. And now if I go back and I do the same command, I haven't done a single thing. I haven't imported. I just said, show me what's available. Look at that. Now PowerShell knows to look at one of those 5 directories and see if there's anything out there that matches. And it's already available to me. I haven't imported it. I haven't done anything. And notice I only have my 2 functions. I have my version info. Now here's the cool thing. I don't have to import that module if I don't want to. I can just call the function and it will auto load it for me. So I have now skipped that import module step, right? I don't have to do that if I don't want to. But I am going to do it here first, just to show you that I can import it. I think I got myself a little out of order here. I probably didn't need to show you guys this. All right, let's skip ahead. Let's remove this module. Demo. Okay. Get module list available demo. Okay, so you see it's still there available. So I'm jumping ahead of my own notes here. So that's the auto import. Show it's still available. And now we can go and we can run the function without importing it manually. And there we go. We have our function running. So if I build a module, and it doesn't have to be public private, if I just build the module with the manifest, have the right directory names and all that good stuff, and I put it in the right location, PowerShell will do the work for me. So now what I wanted to talk about next, and we're really kind of getting thin on time here, so I'll probably skip a little bit, is that's great. We've built a bunch of modules. How can I share them, right? So we've kind of talked about sharing already, because you can say, you can send anyone that folder or the PSM1 and you can say do import module and it'll do the work for them, right? But let's say you wanted to put your module out on the internet or maybe in a public repository or something like that. Let's talk about how to do that. Now, I don't have time to show you how to build an internal NuGet repository, but I do want to show you that it is a very simple operation. There's something you can build. Let me give you a little bit of a precursor to this. We want to put our file out on the internet. Let's say we want to use the PowerShell gallery. How do we publish a module? To do that, we have to follow some steps. But the technology that uses that PowerShell gallery uses to host the modules and for you to be able to import them when you do find module is something called a NuGet repository. It's a technology that's used to make a server that can serve up the modules. You have the ability to install a NuGet server on your own private network so that if you want to host modules internally and not have them out on the public, out available to the public, you can do that. And the great thing about that is when I did that get module list available, you can have PowerShell automatically look at your NuGet repository. You have a couple of configs to do, but if I remember correctly, it's really 2 lines. There's some setup here. This is a pretty easy document to follow, but it's 2 lines to set up. And you see here what they're doing is they created a local repository called local PS repo, and they pointed the source here, and this one is an HTTP one, and this one is at a file share, right? So very simple to set up. I'm going to go through the PowerShell gallery one, but I want you to understand that you're not limited to having to take your work and put it out in the public. You can host it on a file share internally. You can make an official NuGet server internally, and you can also just import modules. So you have a number of different ways to share modules. So let's look at how, if we wanted to get it out to the PowerShell gallery. So to get this out to the PowerShell gallery, what we have to do is we really have a very low bar to meet. All that we need to do to publish to the gallery is come up with some basic information. We're doing the same basic idea that we did before when we made our manifest, but now we're going to point it out to the internet. So to do this, you need to sign up for an account with PowerShellGallery.com. It's free. You can use your Microsoft logon, you can use Gmail logon, and when you do, you can request an API key. An API key is basically a very long, complex series of numbers that serves as a password. The only 2 requirements that are needed to do this, let me do that, is name and the API key, called NuGet API key. This other stuff I added in because I wanted to be a little fancy, but I could simply publish a module out with just these 2 fields. So again, if I'm comfortable making a hash table, I can do it this way, or I could type the parameters out, but I'm going to pass the hash table. And so I'm using the publish module command, and that tells PowerShell, hey, go out to the PowerShell gallery and try to publish my module out to the gallery. Now, a couple of caveats here. This will work if I run this now. I'm not going to run it, but the reason it will work is because I have the module loaded already. It's here. So when I run this command and I'm pulling in this information, PowerShell is going to look for loaded modules that match the name that I specified here. It's not going to look to the folder structure. It's going to look to see what's in memory in those PS module paths. So in order to publish it out to the gallery, I needed to do that copy step. And because I did that, I can now run this command. I'm not going to run the command because I've already done this and I don't want to cause a conflict. But when you would run this, you would get a very simple command that says, we've accepted your module. Very simple. And then once you do that, your module will be available when you do a find module. So now if I do a find module and I want to go look for demo module public, well, that's what I didn't want to happen. Find module, demo module, public, private. I'm now going out to the internet and saying, hey, can you find that? So now look, here's this module, version 8. Here's the name, but look at the repository. It's out on the PowerShell gallery now. And I've given it a description. Here's that description that came up from, oh, it's in the manifest. I made this in the manifest. And it pulled, I only needed to put these 2 fields in. The rest of the stuff either comes from the manifest or there's a couple of fields that don't exist in the manifest, like tags. Tags are a PowerShell gallery concept only. I can now browse out to the gallery. Do I have it open? No, I don't. PowerShell gallery.com, demo module, public, private. I loaded this up earlier today, and there's our module. Nobody's downloaded it. It's not a very popular module, but if I go in here and I look at it, you can see some details here. So it tells me the functions that are here. It tells me the files that are in the thing. It tells me the version history, and I don't know why it doesn't show the tags. It's supposed to show tags. I think I'm just missing where they are. It doesn't have the tags here. I might have done something wrong. So that is all that's involved with sending your module up to the PowerShell gallery. Once you get it up to the PowerShell gallery, it's available from any machine in the world. So now here I am. I'm on my local home machine. If I want to search for that module, I can find it. I'm not on my demo machine anymore. And if I go and I look at details of that module, you'll see here that a lot of that information from that manifest was passed in here. So here's our version, here's our description, author information. I put a fake license URI, but it's also populated the PS gallery information that's important to that now. And here's a whole bunch of other detail that I can pull up if I want. So that's how we publish out to the gallery. And now that we do it out to the gallery, I can simply go install module on my machine. I'm now another user. And it says, hey, you sure you want to do this? Yeah, that's fine with me. Yeah. PC uptime. Boo. I think this is working because this module that I pushed out to the gallery has the bad manifest file from before Mr. Stevie Coaster bailed me out. So I'm pretty sure that's why this doesn't work. So yeah, see it's loaded, but it didn't have the exporter commands because I botched the manifest file. But that's what's involved with getting a file, a module out to the PowerShell gallery. The process for doing it internally is very much the same because the backend software that maintains that NuGet repository uses the same syntax, whether it be to PowerShell gallery or to a local repository. So that is most of what I wanted to show you guys tonight with the time that's allowed. I've gone a very long time. I hope you guys aren't asleep. I would like to take a break. I'm sure you guys have some questions. Increment your version. I'm not going to bother with that, right? I guess we could. I could play around with that. Sure. So let's take a. I'm going back at some of the oldest stuff here. So I think that was on my machine. Sorry, too many. I could throw this in the chat. I've done a talk a few years ago on hosting a local NuGet repository. I wanted to build that into this one, but it just got a little long, and I apologize. I really was hoping to show that off to you guys, but I didn't get there in time. But I'm confident that if you've made it this far, that you guys can probably get that set up with not too much difficulty. So everybody's been pretty quiet, but I see the chat is kind of going, and I know Steve have been handling the questions, and I appreciate that. Thank you guys for helping me with that. But let me ask, is there anybody that wants to go on mic and ask a question or anything that didn't make sense? I kind of bungled on the end there a little bit, so I apologize if I got a little confusing at the end. But I don't have any more demos to show tonight. We've gone through the parts of a module. We've gone through how to build a module, and we talked a little bit about sharing a module. Obviously, there's more you can do with a module than what I've done tonight, and that is why there's automation tools to do some of the stuff for you. Because if you're going to constantly be upgrading the same module over and over again, or if you work in a company that produces a lot of modules, then maybe it makes sense to turn to automation when a lot of this stuff starts to become the same. And it's just the files, the code that's changing. When you get to that level, it does make sense to use some automation. But, you know, for most of us, what we covered today really can get you pretty far started on working with modules in your company. And honestly, I find that a lot of people struggle with this topic. That's kind of why I talked about it. And I will say that if you can kind of master this stuff, it's just another feather in your cap to make you stand out at work with your coworkers and hopefully with your manager. And hopefully that pays off for you at the end of the calendar year when it's review time. So I do want to open it up to questions. That is the end of my demos for this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd love any feedback you have, or if there's anything that was not clear, feel free to ask and I'd be happy to clear it up. Hey, Oscar, I'm glad you enjoyed it. All right, Mr. Matt, we have a quiet crowd. I could turn it back over to you if you like.
I really don't have anything. I think that was an awesomely in-depth and wide demo into building modules with PowerShell. One of the best I've seen, really. So we really appreciate you coming tonight.
Sure. I will tell you guys more about that process when you hit the stop recording button.
All right. I will go ahead and do that.